Welcome back, designers! In this long-awaited tutorial, I will be sharing some tips and tricks so that you also can pass the Adobe Certified Professional Certification Test in Adobe Photoshop. I recently took the 2023 version and passed with a score of 909 points out of 1,000 total points. Today I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks so that you can also pass the simulation part of the test. There are roughly about 17 to 18 simulation questions following about 12 multiple choice and matching questions that are more towards the fundamental skills in graphic design, such as identifying design principles, typography, copyright, and so forth. In this video, however, I'm going to be focusing on the skills required to pass the simulation questions that have you practice actual steps on Photoshop. We're going to be looking at non-destructive editing techniques. We're going to be looking at some document setup and some typography and layers based questions so that you can know exactly what to expect on the 2023 version of the certification test. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, designers, for our first simulation-based task, we're going to be looking at some non-destructive editing techniques. One of the questions asks you to apply a blend mode to one of the layers provided and adjust the opacity of said layer. So let's say that they want us to apply a luminosity blend mode to our flower layer. Over here in the layers panel, you can see I have two layers. You got to make sure you're on the first layer, which says flower. If you're trying to affect the bottom layer, then you're not going to see the effects taking place at all. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right over here to this little setting in the layers panel that says normal, and this hides the blend modes by default. If I go and scroll down, there's going to be several different blend modes. The blend modes you might be asked to see on the test might include overlay, soft light, hard light. It really depends on the effect that they are trying to get you to reproduce. For the purposes of this demo, we're going to select the luminosity blend mode. And you can see when I apply the luminosity blend mode how the image of the flower blends with the color of the circle underneath it, so you can no longer see the yellow. The second part of the question might require you to adjust the layer's opacity. So with that being said, I'm going to go right over here where it says opacity, and you can either type in the value that they're asking for on the test. I'm going to assume, let's say it's 50%. Or you can go and click the little drop-down menu and adjust it manually like so. Let's say the test is saying 50%. I'm going to enter that value and I'm going to press enter to save my changes. And that would basically go and answer that question. Please be mindful when you guys are taking the test of selecting the right layer. Often they're going to tell you what name layer to select if you mess up any part of it. So for example, if I realize I selected the wrong blend mode or I put in the wrong opacity level, reset the question. Always reset the question because they will knock points off for you fiddling around with the program and getting the wrong answer. So reset and try it again if you find that you messed up. I distinctly remember 2 to 3 questions on the test that had you apply non-destructive adjustment layers to an image, one of which was distinctly the threshold adjustment. And I remember it very vividly because we just did a project on this in class. So let's say they are asking us to apply a threshold adjustment to this beautiful puppy. Now they're asking us to do it non-destructively. So going to the image menu at the top of your workspace and selecting adjustments would be the wrong step. They want you to do it non-destructively, which would mean applying an adjustment layer on top of the original image. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the layer that they want me to affect. In this case, it's the dog. To find a threshold adjustment non-destructively, I can either go to the bottom of my layers panel and select this little shortcut that looks like a circle, and then look for the accurate adjustment. Or I can click on the adjustments panel. If for whatever reason this panel is not listed in your workspace while you're taking the test, you can always go to the window menu and look for adjustments, and that will open it right up. So with that being said, they're asking me to apply the threshold adjustment. So I'm going to scroll down and look for threshold. As you can see, the threshold adjustment flattened the image significantly, so it no longer looks like a three-dimensional dog. It looks like a two-dimensional photocopy. They're asking me to adjust the level. If I recall correctly, the test asked you to adjust it anywhere between 50 and 100. So just for kicks, I'm going to set the level to 75. And you can see that with 75, the dog's fur is a little bit more visible and you can tell a little bit more of the details in the body. That right there would complete your simulation task. You just want to make sure that you're doing it non-destructively so that if for whatever reason you change your mind later on, you can always turn the visibility of the threshold adjustment off and you can continue working on the original layer. Another non-destructive question you may expect to see is going to ask you to apply a vibrance and saturation adjustment to the image. So here you can see an image of my beautiful orchids. What I'm going to do is apply yet another adjustment layer. I'm going to go to the adjustments panel. I'm going to look for the one that says vibrance and saturation. So when I click vibrance, you guys are going to see that there's two settings. If I recall correctly, the test is going to ask you to put it somewhere between 50 and 100. So just for kicks, I'm going to apply a level of 75 for both the vibrance and the saturation. And you guys will see that having done so, the contrast of these two images or the one image is turned really high up, so now the colors are extremely vivid. The great thing about working non-destructively is if this was a legitimate project, you could always go and adjust the levels back. So I could lower the saturation, I could lower the vibrance at any point in time because it's non-destructive. Again, just make sure that you guys are applying whatever amount the test is asking you to so that you can get your full points. The test also had its fair share of questions that had you do some destructive editing. There was one question in particular which asked you to fill the empty area of the canvas to match the rest of the image. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically make a selection of this empty area at the top of the canvas and extend the mural into the empty area. The first thing I need to do is select the right layer. So I'm going to select the mural layer. Then, using my marquee tool, I'm going to make a selection of that empty area on my canvas, just like so. After that, I'm going to use the Edit menu at the top of my workspace, and I'm going to select Fill, and under Contents, I'll select Content Aware, and click OK. The cool thing about this feature is that it's basically going to continue the image, as you can see here, by cloning some of the same textures and some of the same colors that were evident in the mural before. Command D to get rid of your selection just so that you can see how well you did. You may also expect to see questions that will have you expand your selection of any one given layer. So take for instance this flat flower layer. I'm going to select the pink layer first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this pink by about 50 pixels. To do so, I need to make a selection of the pink. There's multiple ways to do this, but the easiest is just to hit Command on a Mac or Control on a PC and click on the layer thumbnail in the Layers panel, so that now you can see the marching ants around the pink. To expand the selection, I'm going to go to the Select menu at the top of my workspace. I'm going to click Modify, and I'm going to select Expand. Then you can expand it by however many pixels the test is asking for. Just for kicks, I'm going to leave it at 50 pixels, and I'm going to click OK. Now, if this is where the test tells you to stop, then you stop. You expanded the selection. You can see how it's bigger than what we had selected initially from the pink layer. But if I recall correctly, the test also asked you to fill the selection so that it wouldn't be empty. To fill it destructively, I'm going to go to the Edit menu. I'm going to select Fill again, and I'm going to change the contents from Content Aware to Color, and I'm going to sample that pink by just dragging my mouse over the color of the layer. Click OK twice, and you'll see that we have expanded our selection and filled it. Some of the questions you may expect to see on the certification test are not necessarily to edit the images within the document as much as messing around with the settings of said document. One of the questions is going to ask you guys to place horizontal and vertical guides. So let's practice that, shall we? We're going to go to the View menu at the top of our workspace. We're going to select Guides, and we're going to select New Guide. The test is going to tell you specific measurements at which to put guides. Let's say for kicks, it's asking you to put a horizontal guide at 4 inches. You want to make sure that if it says inches, you type in IN. So 4 IN. If it's telling you pixels, then you would type in 4px. It's very important that you set it to the right measurements. So let's say it's asking us to 4 inches. I'm going to put 4in and I'm going to click OK. And you can see how a guide has been placed right across the document. I'm going to try that again with a vertical guide by going to View again, Guides, New Guide, and I'm going to select vertical, and this time I'm going to put it at 2 inches. So you can see it's clearly been marked off for this particular area in the canvas. So remember, please be mindful of the measurements that they're asking you to input when you're going and putting in guides. Some questions may ask you to adjust the recovery information for the file, to adjust the metadata for the file, or change, for example, the color mode of the file. So in this case, what I want to practice is how to adjust the document's metadata. I'm going to select File, and I'm going to select File Info. From there, you can see that the copyright status is set to unknown. The test is going to ask you to either change the document to copyrighted or public domain. Let's say it's asking us to change the metadata to public domain, which was designate this file to be open for anybody to use or transform in any way, shape, or form. I'm going to select public domain and I'm going to click OK. And that, my friends, would answer the question. Super easy. Some questions would ask you maybe to select a different color mode. To change the color mode of any one given image, all you would have to do is go to the image menu at the top of your workspace, you select mode, and then you can select a different color mode. Right now you guys can see that the color mode is set to CMYK, which is the standard for professional printing. Let's say the test is asking me to change it to RGB, in which case I would just click RGB. It's going to give me a little error message saying that changing the modes is going to affect the appearance of the layers. Depending on what the test is asking for, you would select flatten or don't flatten. Let's say that the test is asking me to preserve the layers, keep them editable. I would select don't flatten so that the color mode is going to change, but the layers are still preserved and able to be edited. Other questions might ask you to create a brand new document with any given preset. To do so, you can click New File and select whatever preset they're asking for. Let's say for kicks, they tell you to select the mobile preset. They're going to probably tell you an additional blank document preset to select. Just for kicks, we're going to keep it at iPhone X and we're going to name it. They're usually going to tell you to name it something, so I'm just going to title this one Phone. One of the questions specifically had you adjust the bit size from 8-bit, which is the standard, to 16 or 32 bits, which would make it a larger file size. I'm going to select 32 bits and click Create. And in so doing, you basically just answered the question. So again, just follow the steps. You just have to read through the prompt to get to the meat and potatoes of the question, but answering it should be fairly simple. You may expect to see multiple questions on the certification test that have you edit the order of the layers, that have you group layers, or that have you add effects to certain layers. So let's take a look at a few examples. One of the questions is going to ask you to hide certain layers from the canvas and to not adjust the opacity of any layers. So what that means is being able to just hide them temporarily, not actually edit said layers. Let's say, for example, the question is asking us to hide everything except the shapes. You can see that there's 3 distinct shapes here, the giraffe, the elephant, and the rhino, and then we have 2 text layers and a background. So if they're asking us to hide all the layers except the shapes, we would basically have to go and click the little eyeball next to the text and click the eyeball next to the background to make both of those layers temporarily invisible. They're not asking us to change the opacity. Remember, that would be editing it. All they're asking us to do is temporarily hide them. So all you have to do is, if they're still visible, click the little eyeball. Several questions are going to have you apply different groups to certain layers, adjust the groups, name them, reorder them, and so forth. Take, for instance, here, we have several shapes once again, and we have 2 distinct text layers. Let's say that they want us to group the text layers. I'm just going to expand my layers panel so that you guys can see a little bit more clearly what I'm doing. If they're asking us to select and group the text layers, I'm going to select one text layer, hold down Command or Control on a PC so I can select the second text layer. We know that they're text layers because the thumbnail, instead of an image, has like a little T. And to group it, I can either press this little icon at the bottom of the layers panel that looks like a file folder, which will create a group, as you can see, or I can use Control G or Command G on a Mac and group it. I'm going to double click on group 1 to rename it text. Let's say that they also want us to group the shape layers as well. So again, I'm not going to adjust the opacity on any of these. I'm literally just going to go and group all of these shapes into one cohesive folder. So I'm going to hold down Command or Control on a PC. I'm going to click on each of the shape layers like so, and I can either hit Command G or click the little file folder icon at the bottom of your layers panel, and you guys will see that these shapes are now grouped. I'm going to double click and name it shapes. So again, it's not asking you to actually make any edits to the appearance of the layers, just basically control the order of the layers, condense them into a group, and so forth. Some of the questions you may expect to see will ask you apply layer effects to the graphics on your document. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to practice applying a bevel and emboss effect to this text layer. I want to make sure the text layer is selected. At the bottom of my layers panel, I'm going to click on FX, and I'm going to select the bevel and emboss effect. And the test is always going to tell you what settings to apply. I wanted you to see a very clear difference between these flat text layers and the aftermath after using bevel and emboss. So I'm going to apply a depth of 200. You can see applying the depth of 200, it applies this gradient to it. Then I'm going to increase the size to 20, and you can see how it looks kind of three-dimensional now. To save the changes, I'm going to click OK. And that's how you answer the question. Very easy step. All you have to do is make sure that you are applying edits to the correct layer and that you're selecting whatever measurements the test is asking for. On the Photoshop certification test, you may also expect to see questions having to do with some very basic text editing. So over here we have a very boring text layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this text layer a little bit more interesting by changing the font, the style, the size, and the color. The first thing I have to do is make sure the text layer is selected, and then using my type tool, which looks like a capital T, I'm going to double click inside the document and select the text layer. Up in the options bar, you can see that the typographic settings are fully listed in order for us to make changes. The font is set to Arial by default. I'm going to change it to Futura, another sans serif font. Right next to Futura, you can see different styles that you can set it to. Let's say I want to set it to bold so that you can see a noticeable difference in that the size is chunkier. Just for kicks, I'm going to select a different size. Let's say I want to change it to 48 points. So you can see the size is significantly bigger. Now the color is still set to black. Highlighted, it looks like white because it's always going to show me in like the opposite color. But to change the color from black to something more interesting, I can go and click on this little swatch right over here in the options bar, and I can type in a different hex code. In certain instances, they might ask you to type in a hex code like I'm doing right now, typing in EB641A, which is going to produce this really pretty orange. In certain instances, they might ask you to go and sample a certain color off your document, so you just have to be mindful of what the test is asking for. I'm going to click OK to save my changes, and then you're able to move on to the next question. Certain questions on the certification test are going to ask you to add text layers to the existing images on your document. You can see that this rectangle is perfectly placed to go and add some kind of title, some kind of subtitle. So what I'm going to do is using my type tool, I'm basically going to go and click inside of this shape so that I can add a text layer. By default, it already saved the previous settings that I was working with, so it was saved to Futura, color is orange, but I'm going to be changing that momentarily. First thing I'm going to do is go and copy the text that they're asking for. So let's say they're asking me to input Hollandale Beach, Florida, and I wanted it to be on 2 lines of text, so I'm pressing enter to put that on a second line of text. I'm just going to go and place it square in the middle of that shape, and then I'm going to go and change some of the typographic settings. So I'm changing the font from Futura to Arial. I'm changing the style from regular to bold. I'm changing the color. So I'm going to type in 3D 4659 so I can basically match one of those blues that are being used in the image. On the certification test, they might ask you to match them by just going and dragging your eyedropper over a particular part of the image, or it might give you a QR code, so you have to be mindful. I'm going to click OK to save my changes. I'm going to change the size from 18 to 24 points, and I'm going to adjust the alignment to left alignment, and then position it square in the middle. Now, it might also ask you to adjust things like the tracking or the leading in between your text layers. Because I have two lines of text, it might ask you to adjust the leading. That option is hidden up here in the options bar. So in order for you to adjust the leading, you have to open your character panel. This little icon right here opens the character panel, or if you can't find it for whatever reason, you can click this little A on the side next to the panels, or you can go under Window and Character, whatever suits you. Let's say that they're asking us to adjust the leading from the default to 24 points, for example. So I'm going to highlight the text, and right over here, there's like a little icon that has like an A on top of an A. That is the shortcut that you want to look for leading. And I'm just going to click the drop-down menu and look for 24 points, which you can see is going to make Florida a little bit closer to Hollandale Beach. And that, my friends, answers the question. So you're able to move on to the next thing. Just be mindful that you guys are selecting the right settings. You can change all of the font, size, color options within the character panel as well. So you can do it directly from the character panel, or you can do it from the options bar as I was doing previously. Another question you may expect to see is going to ask you to adjust the transparency of a text layer while keeping whatever effect is applied to it visible. So in the case of this simulation file, you can see that I wrote the word cookie and there's a very faint drop shadow behind the word cookie. So in order for the text layer to be invisible, for the drop shadows to still remain visible, you have to adjust the fill. So right over here on top of the layer, you have the fill to set to 100. What I'm actually going to do is knock it down all the way to 0%. And in so doing, the text layer is now invisible. You can see it's the same color as the background. But you can still tell there's a text layer because the drop shadow is still 100% visible and creating this cool three-dimensional effect. On the certification test, you may also expect to see one or two questions that have you export certain layers within your document. One question in particular asked for how you would export the layers in your document as separate PNG 24 files. So in order to do so, what you guys have to do is go to File, Export, select Layers to Files. For right now, I'm just going to select my desktop as my destination. Under File Type, I want to make sure that I select PNG 24, and I want to select the one that says Visible Layers Only, and I'm going to click Run. And then what this is going to do is basically make sure that each of these layers, the blue, the pink, purple, and so forth, was exported as its own PNG file. I'm just going to open preview mode so I can verify that this took place. So as you can see, Photoshop correctly exported each of these shapes as individual PNG image files. Finally, you may expect to see one or two questions that either ask you to resample an image or define what resampling means. We're going to try this out with a picture of the avocado. First things first, I need to make sure the layer is selected. I'm going to go to the image menu at the top of my workspace, and I'm going to select image size. From here, I can select under Fit To one of these different presets. So if the image is 8 by 10, I can resample or change the pixel amount of the image significantly by selecting 4 by 6 and 300 dpi, which is going to make the image significantly smaller. You can unlink the images right over here, and then the dimensions will not change automatically. You can go in and customize them further. So if I want the height to be 4 inches and the width to be 6, I can pretty much input that here, click OK, and you guys are going to see that the image will have reduced in size. That, my friends, is going to wrap up today's tutorial. I sincerely hope that you guys have found it helpful and that you utilize these tips and tricks to pass the Adobe certification test. Let me know in the comments if this video has been useful to you, and definitely check out my TPT store that is linked in the description bar of this video if you would like to access any of these practice files, any sample prompts, and any more detailed tutorials to help you pass the certification test. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you would like to see more certification content from me. Thanks again for watching. Hope you guys have an amazing testing session. Peace out.